Okay, and we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Modern Web. Today we have a really awesome event. It's State of Application Monitoring, and we have some really amazing guests today who are going to come share kind of what's going on at their companies. So stay tuned. It's going to be an adventure today. Thank you so much so this is a Modern Web event, but it's sponsored by my company, This.Labs. So This.Labs, we are a consultancy of about 50 developers. It's a great place to work. So if you want to come work at like a really cool, inclusive workplace, definitely come hang out with us. And if you need JavaScript help, definitely check us out as well. You can always find me on Twitter at LadyLeet if you're looking for a new job. We do a lot of amazing events within the community. So there are quite a few. Tomorrow, we actually have monthly mentoring. So this is a Women in Tech monthly mentoring that's happening. We do it every single month, and it's really just a way to just come hang out for an hour, and there's different topics. May 13th, React Contributor Days. I'm going to be hosting that with Kent Dodds. It's going to be about 20 to 30 folks just talking about, hey, what's going on in React lately? So if you're interested in kind of figuring out what's happening in the community, definitely come check that out as well. May 19th, we have another monthly mentoring for Women in Tech. And then May 19th, we have all-day marathons every other month, which are just basically free trainings that you can hop in on. So you can check out javascriptmarathon.com for that. And then May 20th, we have State of Vue with the Vue core team. So Evan, you will be giving an update on what's happening with Vue.js. And then we'll be hearing from a bunch of the ecosystem projects as well to figure out what's going on in Vue. And then State of Accessibility happens at the end of May as well. So that's going to be a really fun conversation. I'm one of your hosts. Again, my name's Tracy. I'm the CEO of a company called This.Labs. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular, Microsoft MVP, and just love the community. So I'm always reachable again via Twitter. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Loza. I am a software engineer at This.Dot, and I'm very excited to be here and talk about app monitoring with you all. Thank you.
And we also have a really amazing set of panelists today. We have Julius, who's the founder of Prom Labs. So welcome, Julius.
Hi there.
And we also have Ben, who is a VP of Engineering at Sentry.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Noshnika, who is the developer advocate at New Relic.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. We have Alex, who's a principal architect at Cisco.
Hey, all.
And then we have Daniel, who's director of technology. Oh my gosh, your title is big.
Unintended.
Director of technology strategy and head of open source. That's amazing at Dynatrace.
I didn't know it would get that long, but yeah, thank you for having me.
Love it. Awesome. And so the way this event works is, first off, there's just going to be, just kind of everybody here on the panel giving kind of like a 5-minute state of, hey, what's going on? What's new? What are some secret things you can tell us that aren't under NDA? Just kidding, but really. And then we'll be going into the panel portion of it, where we have a lot of really interesting questions kind of saved up that we've gathered from the tech community. So all your burning questions will be answered. And as you're watching this, also we'll be monitoring the YouTube comments. Hello, Mohammed. I see you saying hi over there. So feel free to ask questions there as well, and we will get all those questions answered. All right. So, maybe I can just pick somebody. So Julius, do you want to go first in giving us your update?
Sure, yeah. Okay, 5 minutes, you said. Calm me down. So I'm Julius. I co-founded the Prometheus open source monitoring system. So that's one hat I'm wearing today. And then my other hat is Prom Labs, which is a company that I actually just founded last year, roughly 1 year ago. That coincided directly with the beginning of Corona. But before that, I had been already freelancing, just helping companies use Prometheus, get the most out of it, build stuff on top. So today, I think I will be mostly representing Prometheus, the open source project. I think one important thing to say about Prometheus, the open source project, is that it's one of the few very large open source projects that was not born out of a single company with a strategic interest behind it, like Kubernetes or Docker or so. We built it at SoundCloud initially, needing a tool for monitoring to do our own job, coming from Google, having seen how Google monitoring worked back then with Borgmon. And so Matt Proud and myself in 2012 just started building it, and it worked well with the internal cluster scheduler that SoundCloud had back then already. But then since it was open source, and we published it, and Kubernetes came around a couple of years later, it really hit the nerve of the time and really took off, became kind of the de facto standard in open source metrics-based monitoring. So what Prometheus does is really, collect numeric time series-based metrics, and then allows you to query that data, make nice dashboards, but also wake people up at night. So like basically you're sending alerts and stuff, and it has a dimensional data model and the query language to actually work well with that data to do arithmetic between time series and give you like precise answers to the questions that you are asking. It only does metrics, so it doesn't do logs, traces, other signal types. So it's pretty focused in that regard. But in that regard, it's pretty much the most popular open source standard. I think recently we have been doubling down on being even more open in everything we do, in features we accept, in how we work, open documents, open meetings, everything's being recorded, and compatibility. So a lot of vendors are now starting to advertise compatibility with Prometheus, either with a protocol that's used for sending data or with a query language or other interfaces that we have. And sometimes they are 100% compatible, and sometimes they're very much not. And we want to bring light into that situation. So there's official compatibility and certification work going on in the open source project and also by myself. So that's basically, Prometheus, lots of new features, also new query editor, integration with other signal types like traces with exemplars, can talk about that later potentially. So that's Prometheus. I'm still contributing on there, maintaining it, but only one of many team members. So it's really, it's an open governance with people from many different companies being on the voting team. Then in the Prom Labs, on the Prom Lab side, I've been, first I was mainly consulting, but then starting with the company since last year, I've been doing 2 more commercial projects as well, one is Prom Lens, a query builder for the PromQL query language. So that's the Prometheus query language. So that's called Prom Lens, if you want to Google that. And the other thing is building a self-paced Prometheus trainings website. That's training.promlabs.com. So just, helping people get the most out of Prometheus. But, I'm not special in the Prometheus ecosystem other than being a co-founder and still being involved. I don't have we don't control at all the Prometheus project. So that's my little intro and update.
Thank you. Awesome. So many links to so many projects that you work on. Feel free to post them, and I can post them on YouTube for everybody. All right. Next up, Ben, you made a comment about how long your update was going to be, so I'm just going to pick on you.
Yeah. Hey. So my name is Ben Vinegar, and I'm VP of Engineering at Sentry. Sentry is also an open source monitoring platform, but kind of from the other side, focusing on error monitoring, crashes, and also performance monitoring now. So doing some light tracing. Sentry is full stack monitoring, so it's sort of like it's instrumented with a client library or SDK for your platform, whether it's Ruby, browser-side JavaScript, .NET, React Native. You kind of support it all. And if you do that, you kind of become aware of things like, errors that are happening in production that are causing bad experiences for your users, and gives you a lot of contextual data to help you fix it. Sentry is both a company and an open source project. Like other open source vendors, we basically provide the infrastructure in a cloud version for you to use it pretty much very easily. But you can also run it yourself. We make it available for you to do that. Yeah, I mean, I guess my only update is, Sentry has been around for a while. It is the first commit was made in 2008, but only just this past year we launched a sort of performance monitoring capability to what we do. So that's pretty new. And so if you've tried, Sentry years ago and you're curious what it looks like today, it's very different. It's worth checking out.
Awesome, thank you. Do you guys post things like RFCs or anything like that for the open source project, or like where can people find out like where are the upcoming features?
I think that we're different from Prometheus in the sense that 99.99% of the development is done by Sentry, the company. And we do ship self-hosted releases on a monthly cadence using Calver, and those include some light change logs. We usually do a lot of interfacing with community on GitHub. So we post ideas, we look for feedback, but we're not, we do not, I admire the idea of recording every meeting and making that available. We're not, I would say, that open as a company, more of an open source project.
That's always been very admirable. I know Node does that as well. Record every single meeting, put it on YouTube. It's a feat. Thank you so much for the update. Cool. Okay. Noshniko, do you want to go next? Oh, you're muted.
Silence. Wait, maybe there. Got me?
There we go. Yeah.
Awesome. So I work at New Relic, and New Relic's been around for quite some time doing initially the sort of classic like SaaS version of application monitoring. And these days, New Relic is slowly but surely entering the open source era, which is kind of fun. It's really neat to work on like Prometheus consumers and other pieces that incorporate large open source projects. And I got to speak at Open Telemetry Day last year, and like that was really nice to get to build stuff with open tracing, which is a totally fantastic project if you want to add the tracing piece to the like Prometheus metrics piece. It's pretty fun. But right now, what I am focused a lot on is looking at logs and trying to see how, when we have a metrics database, it's great to be able to say, hey, I'm going to predict that I need like this value as a measured metric. But being able to, with the right logging tools and log querying tools, to say, hey, kind of post hoc, just based on the logs that I already have, I want to create new dashboards or new alerts or something based on the data that's in there. That feels pretty powerful. So that's the part that I'm sort of focused on. Last month it was AI ops, and this month I'm thinking about logs. So sort of two ends of the history of monitoring.
Amazing. And where do you do most of your communication, or the company do most of their communication?
You can find me on Twitch at Serverless Mom. You can also find me over on Twitter and on dev.to, where we get to write quite a bit about open source monitoring and development stuff and development culture stuff. But yeah, you find me on Twitch every week. I'm mainly on the main New Relic channel, talking about what changed this week on our little show, the Nerd Log. And yeah, that's been fun.
Cool, awesome. Thank you for the update. All right. So next up, let's go ahead and go to Daniel.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I'm Daniel. I'm with Dynatrace now for around 6 years. Dynatrace is also a monitoring company, very similar, I would say, to New Relic. We also been around for a while, but I see, like, also coming from this last 6 years, I see now that there are huge trends right now coming up, which were already now mentioned a little bit. When I started, people told me, yeah, just don't bother talking to engineers, developers, more like, because they don't care so much about this whole monitoring stuff. It's more operations topic, so that's your persona, talk to them. During the last 2 years, a lot has changed there with the rise of open source in this space. And why, I would say, why is it this way? Suddenly, with the rise also with microservices and cloud native and all this complexity, suddenly also developers during development care about, let's say the word observability, yeah, and monitoring and seeing how those services are all talking to each other, yeah. And through that, they suddenly started to look around. So what can they use to support them during development? And then at the same time, this was 2 years ago, and that was funny because I'm also chair of the W3C Trace Context Working Group, and we were working together with the Googlers and the Microsoft folks, and also New Relic to build this standard. And at the same time, we had the Lightsteps folks with us that were a part of them were doing open tracing, and a part of them were doing open sensors. And we were thinking, oh, there is some new open source frameworks for monitoring coming up, but who to support? And then we were basically like a witness of this move of those two projects that joined together into the CNCF, which is now Open Telemetry. And since then, we see a huge boost on this whole topic of open source instrumentation, open source monitoring. So that's now a huge trend, especially in the developer community. And for me, now at Dynatrace, the question was, okay, how can we best support those open technologies? Because like 6 years back, no one bothered. People wanted to install an agent and be good with it. And now people start to want to kind of have a little bit of a do-it-yourself approach to monitoring, and also want to collect the data they care about, and add business metrics, whatever, also logs, of course. And then the question was how to incorporate this data. And this is pretty much now my focus here at Dynatrace, is the openness topic, also working with the communities. So lots of my work is now working with different CNCF SIGs that care about different parts of technologies, for instance, working with Open Telemetry, where we have a whole team contributing to that. So the JavaScript agent, for instance, in Open Telemetry, one of the maintainers is by Dynatrace. And there is also a mind shift within our company, because that's very often also altruistic approach, because not everyone this person does is really relevant for us as a company or to the product, but it's relevant for the community, and we learn a lot through it, and we build something great with the community. So I would say that is the most important topic. Like, maybe I'm in a filter bubble, but for me, it seems that Open Telemetry right now is everywhere. Also, it's the second largest project after Kubernetes in the CNCF. So it really has an impact. And I think that is, and developer as a persona will be more important in the future. And we have to cover developer use cases better and not only talk to operations. So if I can sum this up like that.
Awesome, thank you. I love hearing community work together. I wish all the JavaScript frameworks would get together and get under a foundation as well. But it seems like in this space, people are much more kind of, I mean, everybody's collaborative, right? But more formally collaborative in a sense. So that's really cool to see. Last but definitely not least, before we go to panel questions, and again, for those of you watching, feel free to add your questions in the comment section. We are going to have Alex from Cisco give us an update.
Hey all, Alex Zakrushko. I'm currently working in the role of a principal architect for Cisco's two large front end, roughly 50 front engineers and growing, working on this. I don't have any monitoring company behind me, but I can talk a lot from the app monitoring and how it's very important for developers in particular for future rollouts, deployments, things like that. How and where we care about this. I can also talk a lot. I joined Cisco fairly recently, 4 or 5 months ago. Before that, I was 7.5 years at Google. Hey, former Googlers. And so that's where a lot of knowledge. Although the custom systems that we have there, I can share how we monitor things, what's important. And again, a lot of this I can talk about from the front end perspective, where these things, can be really used and help bring us confidence in a lot of releases and feature enrollment, gradual rollouts, and all of these things that are of utmost, importance to the developments. Some things that I don't frequently try to recommend to development teams, even small or large, is just the handoff to the DevOps and just be whatever they just monitor or somebody else monitors. I think this is very important for developers as well. So I'm here to share some of these perspectives if we get to that. So yeah, very excited to see you all.
Awesome, thank you. Well, now that we're done with updates, kind of moving on to panel questions. So, again, feel free to ask each other questions. Feel free to answer or not answer, either way. Maria, do you want to go first?
Of course. Hopefully the easiest question, but for some of the viewers who may not know this definition, could you guys explain what is app monitoring?
I'll take it.
You have to call someone out.
Yeah. So, a couple of us have been doing this for quite a long while, and so, traditional application monitoring says, hey, you have a server somewhere where your application is running, and beyond the sort of gross observation of what's happening on that machine, like how much memory is available, how much disk space, if we really want a blast from the past, is worrying about the disk space on the server, is what's going on inside your application's code. And some tools, and Rails really sort of paved the way here, made this a little easier to do sort of out of the box. But people wanted to ask real questions about how the application was performing within that server space. So application monitoring grows out to say, hey, I can give you some detail about that. And back in the day, New Relic and Dynatrace were some of the few that could tell you, hey, that method you wrote called, Nika's sort method, it is the thing that is taking so long. Or even, hey, that thing that's taking so long, it's actually just waiting for the database to come back. And it could give you that level of detail. These days, application monitoring is something that does not make as much sense as a term. With the growth of microservices, you are seeing that you have issues where saying, okay, go monitor on the server where the application is running. It's like, where is this, right? It's not running, okay, it's running on a virtual machine. Okay, we can make that hop. But what do you do about an application that involves serverless? What do you do about an application that is actually running on a swarm of containers? That application monitoring becomes a little less sensical, and we have to think about sort of more complicated ways to look at that data.
One question I have is this idea of just, do you have to do it all? Or can you dip your toe in? And if you're just going to be dipping your toe in, what's the kind of minimum setup you need to be able to even start doing this?
So I'll jump in here. It's about some level of observability, right? I think traditionally software is you launch software and you wait for a user to tell you whether it works or not, or if it doesn't work. That's the world where there's no monitoring whatsoever. And many of us have worked in that world. It's very painful. When you introduce application monitoring or systems monitoring or whatever you want, you're adding different levels of visibility into characteristics of your running software so that you're not reliant on other people end users telling you that something is succeeding or failing. So where can you start? Well, you can start with a tool like Sentry, which will tell you primarily about errors, right? Because maybe that's important to you, and that will offer you some visibility. But frankly, the more that you do this, the more that you're going to want more visibility. You're going to begin to ask questions like, how performant is this software? It's not enough for me to know that it's crashing, because whether it's erroneous or slow is the same negative user experience to a customer. And maybe, on the system side, you're going to care about characteristics of your machines or containers or serverless functions to understand how they're operating. And it kind of just, I think you can start anywhere, but it's going to take you on a path where you're just going to want to know more information, because the alternative is relying on, humans to tell you, and humans are slow. It sometimes involves, going back over email. Can you copy paste this stack trace and send it to me in an email? Can you take a screenshot, right? Like the more that you can take that away and be closer to the end results, like it behooves, pretty much any software team today to do that.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that I think today it's really super easy also when you want to using open source tools to get started with any kind of application monitoring, be it using Prometheus for all kinds of metrics, be it using OpenTelemetry to get your tracing, and then you can use tools maybe like Jaeger to display those traces. So that's all possible today, and I can only invite everyone just to get started with it, because I think the most important thing is also that your monitoring data also tells a story that is kind of that hopefully changes over time. So whatever you do, you see that maybe your performance degrades or gets better. You can, for instance, also with observability measure how many database queries am I having right now per minute in my application, and from deploy to deploy, suddenly it's tenfold. So what did I do wrong, or what did anyone do wrong? So it's also the time, the baselining, finding out what is normal, what is fast for me, what's fast enough, how does degradation in user actions really impact my revenue. Yeah, even so, these are all things that you want to look at. And I'm also coming from times where we just uploaded stuff via FTP, and if no one complains, it was good enough. But right today, I would not feel safe anymore, because it kind of you cannot sleep during the night, right? Because if there is something wrong, you have to start looking for the root cause of the whole thing and dig around. And now you have 25 or 25,000 containers. So where is the problem now? So, I mean, today I would say start small, but as said before, definitely you will start digging deeper then into this space. But you can do it basically, in theory, for free today.
So, please go ahead.
Yeah, if I may chime in, I'm talking about pure from developer perspective. Obviously, there's more specific roles again than the larger companies that do specific monitorings. From a developer perspective, I care about two things when monitoring: is my performance monitoring and my error monitoring. Right. So performance monitoring, how my APIs are responding. Am I getting all those good things? If it's on the front end, what's my metrics for the web performance? Right. First contained on Paint and first time to interactive. So all of these things are performance related, right? How it's performing. And the other thing that I would care about, this is a second bucket for me that's important, is the errors, right? Are my APIs succeeding? What's the error rate of the APIs? And if I can get into specific ones, what are the failures, and can I get the stack traces so I can actually debug some of these things? Same from the browser side. Having APIs fail, that's part of the story, but what are my runtime errors that happen in the browser? What the console logs that the customer can see that this thing errored out? And again, can I see the error and the stack trace, right? So those are two things from the developer perspective, where I'm mostly interested in this. Now, the stages where I'm interested in, we can get into a little bit deeper in the further questions. But just overall, from the monitoring perspective, these are the two things that I feel are most important for me as a developer.
Yeah, and I do want to agree with that. That's one of the things that I also care more about when it comes to monitoring. So it leads to the question of how are the companies making it easier for us developers to integrate these tools?
Okay, maybe I can go. So pitches for other companies than mine. I really like what Grafana Labs is doing in bringing together a lot of different signal types, all in an open source way. So you have metrics, which are like numeric time series that evolve over time. You have logs or event style data. They have an open source scalable storage and querying system for that. That's called Loki. And then they have also a trace storage system, which is pretty new, Tempo and TempoDB. And then they tie that together in their dashboard. And virtually everyone who does open source monitoring uses Grafana as a dashboard, and are creating more and more features to be able to jump between those signal types, which is really great for users. So you can get a metric with a histogram telling you that your service is slow, like lots of requests for the service is slow, and like particularly in this latency bucket, it's pretty large and it's slow. And you get an example in there that you can click on, and it takes you to a specific request that is slow, and then you can actually look at that specific one request and see what path it took through a system, where it was slow, et cetera, and they give you good tools that help doing that. And so Prometheus, for example, supports that as an open source project by supporting it with features that enable that UI use case. So we attach little exemplar trace IDs to histogram buckets, for example, so that you can even make that jump. And we just started doing that. So that's very experimental. So I really like everything that Grafana Labs is doing, but also what many other companies are doing. I think, yeah, in the end, once you have collected a lot of data, it's like a big question of what do you do with it and how do you query it? And so, for example, with that, I'm trying to educate people. I think you need to still learn a lot, because a lot of automatic things are not enough, and you need to understand what your application is doing and what's supposed to do to be able to really ask the right questions and create the right alerting rules. Although some level of genericism will already bring you a long way, I guess. And then, to do that in Prometheus, for example, you need to understand PromQL. So that would be where PromLens, the query builder tool, would come in and just help you with the actual specifics of like writing a proper query and getting it right.
Yeah, I think when we talk about enablement, we need to talk about, for monitoring, I think we need to be honest and say that mainly we're talking about moments that we're trying to avoid. And so a classic one to avoid is that, hey, the sales team says they were just in a demo and this thing didn't work, right? And then you're the one saying like, I didn't know anything wasn't working and I don't know why, I don't know what, right? And right after that, what's the next thing you have to do? You have to wake everyone up, right? Because failed on the front end, so it's probably a front end error, right? Oops, right? Once the front end team is awake, you discover, nope, they're just getting failing API requests. So when we talk about enablement, and when we talk about like, hey, why are we building queries, or why are we using Grafana to build these complex dashboards? Because it's great once we get the data stored and we say, hey, this thing will show you exactly what the cause of this problem was. But when we think about the moment we're trying to avoid, if we do not have an easy way to see a trend within that data and to see a pattern, then we're going to get to a place where we're saying, it's taking me a long time, maybe hours, to sort through that data and find what the cause of this problem is, which sort of puts us back at square one.
Yeah, and also, if I might add, I'm totally with the sentiment of Julius, but it's also a little bit a matter of size. So if we ask how we can make it easier for developers, I mean, my first pitch has to be, of course, we have this agent, we have this one agent, you install it just on the host and it will instrument everything. So the whole thing will light up, and then we have AI that will then attach to this data and usually tells you then exactly what is wrong. So that would, but that is one part of the thing. So ease of use is one part. The other part, I think, is that each tool today has, again, be open for all the other tools and all the other formats that are out today. Because as Julius said, the problem is what to do with all this data. And I think that the future might not be to sift through all or weed through all the data and try to figure out what's wrong and where the anomaly is, because that also requires a lot of domain knowledge. And you have to know, oh, this service is not supposed to talk to that one, and why is this? So the more data you can collect automatically, and the more the tool takes away from you by just detecting anomalies in the data, this without you having to define those baselines and everything manually, I think that helps. That said, this is from at a certain degree or at a certain size of a deployment. I think it works. You can go a long way without that, but after some degree, when you have several application teams and platform teams, it just gets extremely hard to figure out what's wrong in such large things.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's wonderful to hear, especially, for me as a developer. Another great question that kind of goes off of this topic from Joe is, what are the top tools that, what are the top tools that you would recommend and use cases of each? So if you guys can give us a little bit of your thoughts on this, it'd be amazing.
We each recommend our prospective solutions.
No, we have to recommend something that's not ours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Grafana. You can recommend yours too. I mean,
Yes, for observability, I'll mention one, which is look into a structured logging library. So, when we talked about dipping a toe in, I do think, frankly, a lot of solutions do involve a good deal of lift. But that concept of going in a little bit ahead of time to try and say, hey, I want to be able to see a pattern from this. If you wanted to think of something that you could do as an afternoon project, thinking about, can I convert some of my logging over into objects rather than just straight lines of text? That is something that can pay off so much in the future. And so, they exist in different languages, but a structured logging library where you're adding parameters to a log line rather than just saying, blurting out a blob of text, super duper useful.
Yeah, I don't, again, I kind of don't have a tool to back up any of my claims, but I think the most important is not which top tool to go with and which I should just install and do whatever. I think just understanding what you're trying to solve is the most important part, right? Because as a number of folks mentioned already, I have the data now. What do I do with it, right? And again, we kind of touched on the monitoring, like what performance and runtime, like errors and all those things. But I would focus on as well the 3 times where monitoring is important to me, right? For example, as a developer developing things. And those 3 areas are when I'm deploying the binary or my app to whatever, the hosting or anywhere there, right? So during deployment time, that's when I want to monitor things on the errors and things like that, things going sideways. And that's why I typically do the gradual rollout of the binaries, right? So not enabling any new features, just the gradual rollouts of the binaries. So I go steady one by one, and then see if that changes. If I see changes, I can roll back. So monitoring is really important for that purpose, right? So I can have clear signals that things are going bad. And what that means, it's completely up to the team to decide what's the definition of bad. The second one is during the feature enablement. Okay, we rolled out the binary. It's good. Code is the same. All features are disabled. There's no new things. Again, feature flags are kind of very important part here. Now I'm starting to enable feature one by one according to the schedule. I enable for 10%, and then I have development team that is responsible for that feature, monitoring it. And again, they're looking mostly already not in performance, most likely not, but mostly in the runtime errors. seeing if there's some spikes. So that's the second area and second time where I'm interested in having this monitoring to be able to tell, is it okay to go, from 1% to 10%? Can I go in a day now? I have all the results for the day. Can I go to 50% or can go 100% right away? Again, depending on how your team does those rollouts and things like that. And the last one is everything's all rolled out, features all there, but what would wake me up at night should things go bad unexpectedly, right? So this is not one of the binary, this is no features. Things just go bad sometimes because some server is down or something like that. That's the third part where I'm interested in monitoring quite a lot, right? And I do want to be woken up by the tool, whichever means the tool can wake me up. So that, again, this is from my perspective. These are important things for me. So then I will go and check which tool supports some or all of these, right? And again, obviously, pricing, no pricing, other things, I completely have no clue what the pricings for those are. Again, I'm coming from a lot of the Google internal infrastructure that does a lot of these things to Cisco, which uses Cisco's App Dynamics. And again, I'm just getting my feet wet in that area. So I cannot even speak for that tool at all right now. But that for you need to decide which one works for you, which one covers your use cases and your needs, right? So that's my take on that.
I maybe can share what I'm seeing, and I'm saying, so we are not mentioning our own tools. I think if someone needs application performance monitoring at an enterprise scale, you usually know that you need it anyways, so I don't have to tell you that. Logs, we see like a lot of FluentD, to be frank. FluentD, Logstash, Grafana, and Kibana, that's kind of this trio that is for logs right now. I think state of the art in the open source space. If you do metrics, I think especially in the Kubernetes environment, you won't come up. You will use Prometheus most likely, and there, when displaying or like viewing metrics, Grafana is just, let's be frank, the tool of choice. I even saw these dashboards when they had the last NASA thing going on. What was it? The Mars, the thing landing, and they had Grafana dashboards. So yeah, I think they do metrics and dashboarding really right. Everything, if you're interested in starting with tracing today, OpenTelemetry, go for it. Just try it out and you will get everything out. And people usually right now are using a lot of Jaeger for displaying their traces. Might be that Tempo by Grafana might be coming. I'm not seeing it right now so much yet. And I think that would be the logs, metrics, traces, and logs. This trio covered purely with open source tooling, I would say. I see skepticism here.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna be more opinionated. So I think it depends on the persona of who's asking. For example, if I'm in a small 30-person company, I'm one of 2 JavaScript developers. What I just heard is all nonsense words, and like, what is OpenTelemetry? What are all these things, right? JavaScript developers, just to pick on one, type of persona, they're usually not orchestrating servers, right? I'm a former JavaScript developer, and I had other things as well too. I did graphics driver development. When I started a company in the late 2000s, like just a startup, in the late 2000s, I had a Rails app. I went for 2 things. I was actually a very early New Relic customer around 2008. And back then, I think it was like $50 a month, and we tried to squeeze as much as we could out of it. And then we were an early customer of Hoptoad app, which was kind of like the very first commercial error monitoring solution. It might have been even the first error monitoring solution. And it was built for Rails. Someone alluded earlier that Rails kind of built some, Rails had some sort of things inside of it. And that was that, for me, that was all I needed. Small company, 4 people. I just wanted to know, is my experience reasonably fast? Because if you don't have the visibility, you will create some endpoint. You'll create some API endpoint that has like a n+1 query, and it's going to take forever, and you just won't realize unless you mashed it yourself or somebody told you. And then I want to know if things were falling over, which is where I got error monitoring. That's where kind of Hot app came from. So today, I believe those two are very simple, and you can instrument them. You can find, those types of solutions, performance monitoring and error monitoring. There are lots of solutions out there. Between all of us, we represent some of those. And if I'm a JavaScript developer, I want to know, I want to know when n is not a function, or cannot access null, undefined of null. All those weird edge conditions. And I think this is why you need error monitoring, because if you just go for a tool like metrics, for example, what will typically happen is you can connect error rate to metrics. And so you can find out, for example, if you deployed a new version of your software and everybody falls over because the error rate balloons. And so something is wrong, and you can investigate from there. But there's a whole class of bugs that will never trigger the error rate to be meaningful for you to investigate further, right? Your error rate could be 0.001% of people coming to your website. But that 0.001% might actually be triggering an exception on your e-commerce website's checkout page. And if you don't have something that's going to tell you, hey, a crash is happening on this page, and here are the users impacted, and here's the stack trace, you're just at a massive disadvantage. And my experience is also you're not going to find those in logs. And certainly if you're a JavaScript developer, piping logs from a JavaScript environment to a logging solution is tricky. So I personally believe that error monitoring is like a really crucial tool, and I think performance monitoring is important. I think they're all important. I usually describe it as kind of like errors, performance, logs, metrics. I think of them as 4. And so that's why you omitted errors from that. And
let's call them events. So events would be the word for everything that might be an error or anything else that is kind of still connected to a trace in some way or the other.
I do just want to mention too is I really encourage people to use open source tools, especially because it's only through open source tooling that we can hit the edge cases, right? Hey, I run this in this particular way. How else am I going to monitor this? No company's going to see the profit in doing this, but if you can share knowledge, that's great. I would say saying, hey, you can stand up, event monitoring, tracing, and metrics, and then using the term for free. I think that's wrong. It is free this month on the balance sheet because you didn't have to go buy a SaaS product. But next month, when you say, hey, where are the new features? And you say, well, we're 20% way on the project of our metrics database finally being queryable by everybody in the company, and we solved the permissions issue on this dashboard, and we're on 20% way on this other tooling, and no new features, and nothing we can sell, but don't worry, we're becoming really, really good at building our own internal monitoring tools. Right.
Full agreement. Yeah.
And I know you know this. I just think it's worth considering, right? There's always this balance, and I really do think. New Relic's one, Apt's another, Dynatrace is another. And if you're really just starting out, a little bit of structured logging or some other homebrew thing is great. But also maybe, just go get a service to start with. Don't start with being like, thing 1, stand up a metrics database. Thing 2, make querying of the database work. Thing 3, figure operations. No, just go buy a service to start with. And then when you reach edge case, I think then open source tooling is a massive, massive help. And building that expertise totally builds team ability. Well,
but it's so
chat.
I would add one thing to that, it doesn't have to be an either or. I think there's people who offer open source standards as hosted services.
Absolutely.
So Grafana Cloud, for example, is basically all open source. You could run almost everything yourself. You're not really locked in. If you write Prometheus style alerting rules or something like this, you could easily migrate it out. Of course, they still have some extra features. But basically, the most of the stuff is based on open standards.
The topic is how much time do you invest? And there I completely agree. How much time you invest in your open source tooling at some point. If you stand up a whole team that is now writing your monitoring code, and let's be frank, I'm an engineer. writing something new from the greenfield is super fun, yeah, and writing your own monitoring system and the backend, new technologies. Hey, I can use Kafka for once. So everything great. At some point, of course, data retention, storing this data, taking care of backups and all of that costs all money. Yeah. So I completely agree. It is never free. Yeah. At some size, when you're small, I think you're in for the fun and you can play around with it. But at some certain degree, when you find out that your monitoring really is now starting to become work for you, then you might better look into a SaaS solution, open or not, that take care of you for you and run the platform, the monitoring platform for you, because it's just a lot of experience and a lot of work that goes into that.
I think this leads to another question. So when we initially asked this, some questions online about, hey, what do people want to hear? People are like, why is it so darn expensive, right? And, I guess, like, do you guys see the cost of app monitoring going down, or are there any ideas of, how to save money with app monitoring, or is it just not expensive and everybody's?
I want to tie in with a great question that was the last thing that was posted in chat, which was Thomas asking about how about instrumenting the apps or getting data from the apps. And I think one of the reasons initially that this monitoring was so expensive is that the sort of OG companies very often had tools to go and instrument your app out of the box, and would even have done the work of like, hey, if you're using this little Flask library for Python, we wrote some instrumentation for that, and it will detect it and work out of the box. And initially, in sort of the teens or whatever, 8 years ago, that was such an edge that it put all these companies in a position where they could charge quite a bit, because the idea of going into your app and adding all these metrics calls just felt so daunting when you got that stuff out of the box. So they could charge whatever they wanted for data ingest and these other pieces. Now we're seeing open source tools that are quite competitive and do pretty neat stuff. It is not on the level, I will say, like Dynatrace or New Relic, my company, do a better job currently for most mainline apps than those open source tools, but they do exist. So there is that path. And then the big thing we're seeing is not only is the base service cheaper, but what people are asking for it is quite a bit bigger, right? When you're talking about, I have 200 serverless, functions running simultaneously, I want to go and see how they're performing. You're asking quite a bit more than saying, hey, I want to send data from 4 instances of an app and see it on one dashboard. So, the lifting that most SaaS companies are offering is quite a bit higher.
Yeah, and I also want to chime in there. You have to see, especially the instrumentation code. If you look at open source instrumentation, also like OpenTelemetry, they are still, though everyone tries to contribute, they are still way behind. There are years and years contributed to instrument a Java JVM properly, or instrument, if you come from JavaScript, instrument Node.js properly, gather event loop metrics. How do we do that? How do we get stack traces or like code level visibility into Node.js, using stack traces and adding that to your trace and all? There is a lot of stuff going on. And I can say that for each technology, it takes a whole development team, and it takes a whole almost a year to make the instrumentation for a new technology really work. And then you have to maintain the whole stuff also, because as soon as you do instrumentation of things, the APIs constantly change. Every new Node.js version changes internals that you have to instrument again. Instrument serverless function, Lambda, for instance, you have to dig into the Lambda internals to get the right stuff out of this. So this is all an enormous amount of work if you just see the development effort that goes into a commercial solution, for instance. And then, of course, the data has to be stored somewhere. And that's a lot of data. If you do metrics, traces, logs, events, infrastructure data, topology data, user data, these are heaps and heaps of data. And I think one has to just run the numbers, and then it's not that expensive in the end. It just depends on your size.
I would say on the instrumentation side, I get that. Like a paid team with lots of resources can create high quality instrumentation. On the other hand, with an open source way, like you can distribute the effort quite well as well. For example, with Prometheus, we have this concept of different exporter types for different service you might want to get instrument metrics out of, and we have on our page, on the Prometheus page, like hundreds of them by different, like all kinds of different groups around the planet, building like a Postgres exporter, MySQL, and for some weird networking device and so on. But yeah, for sure. I mean, the best way, in my opinion, is also to get to really put metrics into your own application, to really track the metrics you specifically care about. Like this is something that often is not easily done in an automatic way. You can automatically instrument certain HTTP frameworks and that kind of thing, but maybe there's still some custom events in your code that you really care about. And we really recommend also doing that with Prometheus and the open client libraries there.
Yeah, I was recently I work mainly with serverless at New Relic, and I recently worked with somebody, got in touch and said, hey, do you monitor serverless PHP? And I said, no, because that's not a thing. You just made that up to confuse and upset me. And I discovered that not only was it a thing, it is not a supported thing. It's not a supported runtime in the AWS Lambda functions, but someone has done it. And there's this like Symfony serverless framework where you're running PHP serverlessly on AWS. Also, PHP doesn't have, like event-based coding, right? So it's like, it's a whole ball of wax. And I thought, wow, I was not able to help that person, but that's okay. That's the only time anyone will ever request that product, and we're certainly never going to add instrumentation for it. Then another person got in touch the next week that they were doing exactly the same thing. And this is the power of open source instrumentation and open source metrics, right? Is that there just is not a world where that's going to be our top priority, right? It's an extremely niche thing to do from very mature teams that love PHP and also serverless. But if you are bought into the Prometheus landscape, you can absolutely say, hey, one person has written a package, and you can start from here and expand out on it. And so you have to embrace open source if you're going to do observability in a modern landscape.
Yeah, to be fair, of course, then you have to look a bit more closely at, okay, who actually wrote this thing? Is it good quality or not, right? But you have more flexibility, but also more responsibility, maybe.
Yeah, and I see this struggle in also in open telemetry right now with the instrumentation code. I think the future will be not this instrumentation like you do it now with monkey patching for JavaScript, for instance. I think that the future, and that is where what we believe in, will be that some libraries, let's say MongoDB for the library for Node.js, will come with open telemetry hooks built in, and then instrumentation can simply tap into this thing and gather the data. Also, what we believe in is that in the future, for instance, Dynatrace or New Relic or AppD can go to MongoDB and tell, hey, we are writing for you now open telemetry hooks into your library. Do you bother? Likely they might not. If New Relic comes along and says, we are now adding our New Relic SDK to your code, they are likely not so happy about that one. So I think with this, with standards, there comes always the standardization effort, and also the formats that OpenTelemetry defines will in the long run become a standard that will help instrument things out of the box, and then things come with batteries included, and this will hugely change the whole landscape. So at least that's our hope, and we see that already happening a little bit in cloud vendors, for instance, where they add certain things that work already and are instrumented like that.
Thank you so much for answering these questions in so much detail. Please go ahead.
Alex, were you going to say something?
Yeah, that was. I think I saw some of the questions about the Angular, React, JavaScript in general, and obviously those come with their own challenges. And again, sorry, I'm not very versed on the open source solutions or any actually products themselves. again, due to being within the exclusive kind of custom solutions that we had at Google for a long time, and just getting to know the external things. However, one thing's and challenge there was for the error monitoring, for example, right? The code that you ship to the browser is pretty much optimized frequently, and frequently also renamed too, at least within Google's. So basically, you don't have a proper the JavaScript that you ship is basically a dot b is not a something something, right? So it's very much optimized and challenged. So how do you do that? That's the first challenge. Basically, obfuscating and defuscating code. How would you get to actual stack trace of that particular build? And again, there's a lot of custom logic, and hopefully there are tools that actually can help you deal with this, getting back to your actual lines of codes and actual, pinpointing where your error is in your sources. If there are tools like that, that'll be great to hear from the group here. And the second challenge, and the second challenge is aggregating all this data. All right. So, for example, by users and by occurrences. So how do we make sure that, or even marking things like, okay, I know where this is coming from. That will be a future noise in my future rollouts. I know this will be handled. How do we do this? Is it possible or not? But aggregating, again, obviously some of the tools have querying and things like that, but off-the-shelf aggregation of JavaScript errors, maybe by stack trace, right, is a great way to, combine things together and actually make it visible for the user, very highlighting that, okay, I care about this error, but it happens to 2 users only, and it happens 10,000 times. Maybe they got on some page and just completely, recreating this. Versus, would I care more about the issue that happened 500 times, but to 100 users, right? That kind of occurrences is less, but user-wise, it's probably could be more impacting, right? Or maybe this is okay, this is a known issue and we can just quiet it down, mute it for some time. So then, we typically try to do releases obviously daily, and then there's a bunch of feature enablement during the whole day. So how can we reduce the noise as well? So those are interesting things and challenges in the JavaScript error monitoring. I'd be very curious to hear if any of the tools actually deal with some of this. Here.
Yeah, if I might start. I mean, source maps and stuff. That's all. I mean, we auto inject our agent also into the browser payload, and then we collect Angular and React and whatever. It's the same instrumentation effort that you have for anything else. Like when you instrument some JavaScript on the back end, it's pretty much the same monkey patching that you have to do. And then you send off the data to the server, and where it's then collected. Very important also, I think this whole browser monitoring, I think what happened to this whole web performance monitoring thing anyways, because this was such a huge topic and now not so many are talking about it. Lately, one rather large company told me they have a problem with the Node application because it's so slow. And then I looked at their data in Dynatrace, and I saw Node is idling. What you have is you spend 7 seconds rendering your front end, so that's your actual problem. And there was not even the knowledge available that they could just look that up and see that the front end might be to blame. So front end monitoring should again become way more important, in my opinion. And there are I would say the tools, and I even would say Cisco App Dynamics does it. I'm not 100% sure, but you also do real user monitoring, and most of the commercial tools have solid real user monitoring. In the open source space, OpenTelemetry has also a browser agent. It's not right now where the enterprise tooling is at this point, but who knows? Yeah.
If I can go back to that like front end grouping thing for a little bit. One of the reasons, or one of the ways that Sentry and I think error monitoring products distinguish themselves from logging is because they are focused on errors. They can make curated decisions about how to present that data. For example, like doing aggregation out of the box, right? instead of just having a stream of logs, we could say, hey, here's a problem. It's happened 1,000 times. Here's 50 users. And I think most of our monitoring products do something like that. And New Relic and other products who have complementary features also do things like this. I know that grouping is one of the hardest challenges for us, and that's because of the noisiness of the data. Firefox wants to give you a different stack trace than Chrome. It's funny that we talk about standards around OpenTelemetry, but the browsers haven't really gotten together and figured out, what is the standard of a stack trace output. The only standard that exists is that there is an error object. That error object has a stack property, and it holds a string or something. After that, it's kind of like the browser vendors have basically just kind of done whatever they want. And so for companies like ours, we look at that data, we try to do some normalization, and then we try to sort of figure out a way to group it together. Right now, that's all kind of like the way that we do it, because Sentry is open source. You can take a look at the source code yourself. We try to pick out keyframes. We make some sort of, we have our own kind of heuristics about what we think are the most meaningful parts of a stack trace that we can group on, like kicking out frames from your libraries or dependencies, because, who knows, and trying to focus on your code, the code that you've written. Maybe it's the first frame. We might prioritize that as an example. And this is something that we don't have one algorithm that we apply for everything. It's like we actually have to go for different frameworks and different platforms, different runtimes, and sort of apply a different set of heuristics, because those stack trace, a stack trace coming from Ruby is going to look very different from a stack trace coming out of Python. And to determine, good grouping, we kind of have to make conscious decisions for all of them. So anyways, that's at least that's an explanation. We pursue a very kind of like curated approach. Here's a language, here's a runtime. We're going to try and just be, do whatever we can do to make this look really good, or at least the best we can. And browsers are the worst.
Yeah, browsers are tough to monitor. There's no joke about that. I think a piece that's worth considering as well is some kind of synthetics monitoring. So while it's great to be reporting directly from the browser, if possible, from the user's computer, it's also a thought to say, hey, if you have a big enough org, why not have an automated system that goes in and tries to load our pages and does complex user actions? And this is an area where open source was definitely there first, where there were open source tools to do this before, like SaaS companies tried to pick it up. And so that's nice, because the standards are quite open to do like scripted behavior and stuff. And hopefully that gets us away from that moment so terrible to any team doing incident response and saying, can someone check if this piece is working? Don't use the office Wi-Fi because we're on the VPN. Somebody, turn off Wi-Fi on your phone, use this fake credit card number that we have stored in a Slack file, and then go and check if like checkout is working, if this piece is working. Hopefully synthetics can get us away from that.
Such great answers. Thank you all. You can definitely tell what y'all are passionate about. We have a lot of really interesting questions in the chat. Are there any that you all saw that you want to touch on next?
I mean, monitoring the question by Acetine, how would you monitor microservice application? Tracing the root cause is quite difficult. Yeah, I think, again, so monitoring a microservice application, and there suddenly this application monitoring is not so important anymore in when you are talking about serverless and microservices, because maybe not so much is going on in those microservices. Now you care about how those microservices are communicating with each other. So you need tracing. That's the first thing for that, to figure out how things are communicating and how maybe the one slow service might be just caused by some API call downstream that causes the whole thing to stall, or back pressure on an API, whatever. So you need definitely tracing. And then there are different tools around. As I said, with Dynatrace, we collect everything, also the topology of all your services. And we have more of a pass model in the background a graph more or less of everything that's going on. And if something slows down, we can correlate the root cause usually. So that means we will show you where this is actually coming from, because this is how the dependencies look like in your application. And I think that is and is always also, I would say, the future to figure out things in larger microservice infrastructures, because it's so hard to figure that out otherwise.
Make one comment on that, which is because microservices, organizations have evolved in such a way that microservices exist. It's pretty, my personal experience, unless people disagree, is that those microservices that exist in your organization are often written in different languages. We're just not in a world now where if you have a technology provider that's just doing Java monitoring, that doesn't work anymore, because there's going to be something in the middle of that trace diagram that's written in Go. And so today in 2021, you need a solution that's going to be able to span not just trace down, but also trace down across multiple languages. Just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. And that's right now also usual. And also when we talk about traces, and there, like, the interop comes into play, where all the vendors and all the cloud providers and basically everything that does something with tracing, luckily, is collaborating, is W3C trace context, which kind of formalizes the way traces are propagated between tools. But it's also with that, it's possible to start a trace in Dynatrace, and then it runs through New Relic, and in the end it ends up in Dynatrace again, and you have still an end-to-end trace, which is, for my opinion, or it's AWS in the middle, whatever. Yeah, in my opinion, it's a super important thing, and we are super happy that this exists, because again, standardization. And also then, even if you cannot instrument the code, like context propagation within one service is extremely complex to keep the context and take it out in the beginning and put it in the end when the outbound call happens. And as soon as you have trace context there, you can use any tool, whatever, that just is able to do this context propagation to at least not lose the context in your traces, even if you cannot look into the service really. So I think that's, but there we will see a lot happening in the future. It will become easier.
This is my reminder to go and bother AWS again, because their X-ray tracing does not use the standard format, as I'm sure a couple of you know. So, they produce all this great data, which would be really great to tie in with all these other pieces that we have, but we can't do it because they use a completely proprietary format.
But I see it happening that, Microsoft with Azure is already there, because they were from the beginning participating also in trace context. Google is there with Google Cloud, because they're also founding member. And trust me with that AWS, also they are now entering the whole open telemetry space. We know that with the collector exporter for open telemetry, and I can see it happening that trace context will at some point also live there. But they have 3 or 4 computers running over there, and it seems that they are rather reluctant in changing which data they send between their services. Might be a cost thing.
Something I would add is, distributed tracing, I think for many people is like a space cadet, high-flying, complicated thing. And previously, distributed tracing, those were tools, almost like individual tools. Like if you wanted tracing, this is another product. And 2 points I want to make about that is, one, everyone's running microservices if you consider that a front end is a service, which I like to do. So, tracing can apply just as simply as there's code running on somebody's machine in the browser, JavaScript, and it triggers off a request, which can trace to your Django or Rails backend. Like, that's a trace right there. It's as simple as that. So most of us actually, pretty much anybody can benefit from this technology today. But there's a couple challenges, like one, not every distributed tracing tool considers the front end as being part of that service. And the second thing I want to say is that distributed tracing, going from these sort of individualized tools, are now more just kind of becoming a feature set or a property of monitoring tools in general going forward. As an example, because I I feel the need to comment on this. I'm sorry, I've spoken a little bit here, but tracing the root error, we've added tracing capabilities, light tracing capabilities to Sentry. And that's because of this exact problem. If you have an error in your front end, and it's because it's actually a problem that was triggered from an API response that maybe returned some data that you did not expect, and the JavaScript did not parse it correctly or made an assumption about the return value, and that resulted in an exception, it's not enough to just tell you about that exception on the front end. You're just missing the story. You can maybe piece it together, but it is, something that we do today is to say, hey, this is an error that exists, and we've traced the origin to another, 500 response or something happening on the server. And so tracing can be as simple as that, and it is becoming, part of the solution set that curated tools are bringing to the market, which are worth exploring.
That's wonderful. Thank you for answering all these amazing questions that we're getting from the public. We're almost close to wrap up, but I do want to ask one last question that might be very beneficial for those who are still on the fence. What would you tell these people in order to convince them to try app monitoring? These could be people who are maybe think it's too complex, maybe they're working on small projects. What would you tell them to jump on board?
I think if you're really working on a very small project, if you're in a boot camp, if you're working on a demo project, why are you using Git? Why are you using like a task tracker? Why are you leaving comments in your code? Right? It's just a little project, doesn't matter, right? The reason that you use all those things is you may find them useful even on a very, very small project, but also you don't want to be in the habit of producing garbage. Right? Like even if it's probably not something you're necessarily going to come back to or use is going to be successful. So thinking about observability and monitoring is a critical skill to build. So do it from the start and you'll get good at it and it won't feel difficult. Right? But it really belongs in that sort of basic set of, task tracking and agile and test-driven development or testing and those pieces or version control. Yeah.
I second this. It's really important. I think we care about the quality of the code, and we don't want to, your customers be letting you know that your things are going wrong. I mean, that's already the last step of defense. And we try to shift as much as left as possible, right? We try to make sure we don't have QA teams catching our bugs. We make sure that we have good unit testing and proper testing so they don't even become defects, right? Obviously we do, but then we'd still have, a test team who can monitor certain things. You can think of it as monitoring as well, right? And then obviously we have, as far as we go, there's more and more, defenses mechanism, and monitoring of your app is basically one next to then the customers letting you know that things are broken. So I think it's important to have it because it basically completes the whole picture of caring about the quality of your product. That in the end, that's the ultimate goal, I think, for me. Again, this is personal opinions. But yeah, I think this is what you want to do. You want to provide the best quality as you can, and you want to be alerted yourself that your customer is having issue, not customers calling you and trying to reach you out on some kind of social media and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I second that. And I mean, as we are constantly not only using those big things like Google or Gmail, and if something is broken in Gmail, some SRE is called and something is going on. We all the time, I mean, maybe for booking some vacation at some remote place or something, we are all the time also using all those small sites. And honestly, the web is broken as it is. How often does it happen that this one form does just not work, and I just want to do this little thing there, and now this web page is down, and if I come via VPN, it does not let me in, and all these annoying stuff. I just wonder why just put this little more effort into this thing and unbreak the web, please, yeah, because it's so annoying, and I think it's a matter of professionalism to do monitoring, because to measure if it works, as any industry everywhere has some way of quality insurance, we should also do that for our development. That's fine.
I would add, it's like unit testing for production. And when you have tests and there's something that checks that it's actually working, it will give you confidence and it will be fun. So it's like, otherwise you're stumbling around in a dark room, but when you switch on the light, you can actually move much faster and you can do the right things. And you're also going to have more fun actually looking at things like, oh, wow, look at these stats and how it's, going. Oh, I never thought like this thing was so slow. And so, just from a human perspective also, it's actually going to, give you a lot.
And it sounds like we need to get all the browsers together and all of you all in the same room and talk to them about how they're going to standardize. That would actually be pretty amazing. We do browser contributor days. Should have invited you all, but it's definitely something we'll bring up when I'm talking to the browser folks next. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this. It was really amazing, lively conversation. For those of you watching, these lovely folks are all on Twitter as well. So definitely Google them, find them, check them out. And, the conversation doesn't stop here. So thank you again for joining, and we hope to see you on another one of our shows. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you.
everybody.